Welcome to Skeptarchy. I'm your host, Dell, and here with me today is my co-host, Cory. We both brought topics we want to talk about, so it should be a good episode. Who wants to go first?
I guess mine's kind of controversial, so I guess I could start if you want.
Sure.
So I guess it's not too much. I just think we should probably talk about the Israel-Palestine situation here. I've been following a lot of different podcasts and reading a bit about it, and how the use of the term apartheid fits this situation. Apparently, the term apartheid actually just existed only for the South Africa situation, and then now it's being used for other situations where people are being segregated on ethnic lines or along certain when there's a dominant group and there's a marginalized group. And it sounds like the state of Israel is not doing good things for the people of Palestine, the Palestinian people. There's been some land being taken, housing, people being ejected from their houses. There's been situations where there's been bombs and on innocent people being dropped. It's just, you've got war crimes happening and segregation and to a population that is technically within the same borders as Israel. And it's just, I don't know.
So it's funny. I had to, I don't know that much about it, but I know a little bit about it. And so my husband was asking about it the other day, and I don't think people realize that there's like the way, maybe the folks listening to our podcast are more well informed, but the way there are literally just sort of like two islands of Palestinian land within the borders of Israel, and in particular, Gaza elected, do you have a sense of how long ago it was that they elected Hamas? Because Hamas was already designated as a terrorist organization when they were elected. And I'm thinking that was around 10 years ago. It was certainly during the time that I was politically aware. And as we just discussed, I'm 31. So I think it was sometime in the last 10, maybe 15 years. And I remember that being a big deal because Hamas was already declared a terrorist organization and had been doing terrorism, pretty uncontroversially. And then they won the election and they've been in charge of Gaza ever since. And I think that has been a major blow to, any concept of peace, because Israel does have a legitimate claim to say that, look at the leadership of Gaza literally says they want to kill all Jews.
That's not good.
It's regardless of whether or not they have the power to do it, which I think most everyone agrees that the people of Gaza specifically do not have the power to do that. That gives such fuel to the situation, right? And I don't know. I think Israel at this point claims that the elections since have been, or maybe even the original election, were rigged in some way. That Hamas is not a legitimate leader, and I don't know much about that, but I just know that is something you'll see said is like people saying, the Palestinians literally do want all Israelis dead, and that is part of Hamas's charter, but Hamas is only in charge of Gaza, and Gaza is only one part of Palestine, and
it's, I wouldn't want to pretend that it's like a cut and dry, simple situation, right? But there does seem to be like a definite power imbalance, and
yes, very much so.
And there are actually like Palestinians who they're not in Gaza, they're in other parts of
they often have to work in Israeli territory. Isn't that like one of the big things? And there's been strikes occasionally. And that's kind of the problem is like, in order to have any economic viability, not just because of like the embargoes that they're under, they don't even have electricity most of the time, but even just to like for individual families to go to work, they usually need to have jobs in Israel. So they have to cross the borders and have jobs there. So like they have to be among Israel. So it is a lot more like apartheid in South Africa, because that's a lot of how apartheid in South Africa was they. But
then, they don't have voting rights in the Israel government. So they don't even have a say in that aspect of their lives.
Right, because they have theoretically their own country. It's just that their country has very little economic opportunity for them. Yeah. So it's, and I think the population of Israel is actually a fair bit smaller. Is that still the case? I mean, I know it's growing all the time. It was certainly the case in the beginning, but I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure right now exactly but I mean, that would still, in a sense, be similar to South Africa again, right? Like, where like the Black African population was much larger than the white South African population, and all the like you say, there's when one group owns the stuff and doesn't want to give you the stuff, I don't know what you're supposed to do.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to like, regardless of past wrongs, what will make the situation better? Like, what will create less Palestinian terrorists and more economic instability is almost certainly the wrong answer to that question.
I'm sure that taking their houses and bombing them that will create less terrorists, right?
Yeah, and I also ran into this argument that like Israel legally owned those houses and like they were just squatters, which I did a little digging into, and it seems like that's just true. Because Israel just sort of decided they owned, like they created a government and then they just created documents that said we own these places. So I don't know if you know anything more about that than I do, but I was like, I don't know. I mean, I could just write a piece of paper that says I own my neighbor's house, but I don't know that then I get to say I'm justified in shooting them over it because look at these legal documents. Like, like legal documents only mean something if everybody agrees what the government is and like who's in charge and who made the rules. Yeah.
It also seems like, maybe I'm mistaken, but like you say, like it seems like the Palestinian people are kind of stuck on these, like they are forced to live in certain areas. And it sounds like a reserve system in a lot of ways in Canada, where Indigenous peoples were put in reserves and they were told like, okay, but all the rest of this belongs to us.
Right.
So, as Canada, we own all of this and you get to live on this reserve.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost more similar to that than it is to apartheid in that way, because, I mean, there was certainly the idea of separate but equal did not go well during apartheid in South Africa. Right. However, there were very significant punishments for white people to be in black areas as well as black people in white areas after curfew. I mean, so that was a little bit more... They really, really, really wanted, like, basically a two-state solution for South Africa, like, was their goal. And the Israeli-Palestinian situation seems a little bit more like what you were saying about, like, how reservations work for indigenous North Americans, where it's like, okay, we're gonna set aside this land for you, and it turns out to be really shitty, and then we're just gonna, like, take more of it when we feel like it, regardless of what our contract said earlier. Yep. Although I'm sure under apartheid in South Africa, I'm sure they decided, like, I'm sure nobody gave the black Africans the good land. I'm just going out on a limb there and guessing.
That's right. Yeah. Which is why, actually, wasn't it just a few years ago that in South Africa there was like a movement of white farmers who were pissed off because they had their land being taken by the black government now, or the new government.
I should research this for next week, because I've actually been to South Africa, and I'm friends with a number of South African farmers, whom I do not agree with on a whole lot. But I would love to talk about the whole white farmers, South African genocide against white farmers thing that they've been using to get the right wing in America riled up. It's kind of interesting. And my one friend, his wife is from Zimbabwe, but of course, back when it was Rhodesia. So her family was one of the families forcibly removed when the black population took Zimbabwe back and had their revolution. So, yeah.
It's even that, I think it's, you can compare it to, in some ways, like if indigenous peoples had the power and the will to collectively take back the land that was taken from them, I mean, there would be an uproar, right? Like you'd have like your white farmers would be pissed right off, and like, I don't think that. I mean, I would think that they were probably justified in doing this.
Right.
But
yeah, and it was quite violent, I think, in Zimbabwe, and Robert Mugabe was not a great dude. I mean, he was a pretty brutal sort of dictator. And I haven't dug like a ton into the Rhodesia Zimbabwe situation, but it was certainly messy all around. And I think the population difference was extreme. Like it was far, like I think South Africa is like 75-25, and I think Rhodesia was like 95-5. Like I that's just off the top of my head. I'll have to do a little more digging, but it was an extreme population difference, and I think also an extreme wealth difference. And so that's the recipe for a disaster, you know?
And this seems to be like the complicated situation with like colonization and imperialism is like when a country like the UK or Britain at the time, I suppose, or whoever else, they go around and they colonize these places and take them over. And then like in Canada, people build lives here, and our country has been here for so long now. And then so now it's complicated to even address the situation that we live on stolen land. Like that we took this from people who didn't give it to us. So it's just it becomes hard to solve, because now you're ejecting people who live there their whole lives, but also live on land that didn't. And
they probably paid dearly for it, just not to the Native Americans that they stole it from, that somebody stole it from. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I recommend, if you'd like to explore these types of topics through non-actual current events, just watch Deep Space Nine. Surprisingly many relevant topics, and it's there's a lot of issues with colonization and when is terrorism justified, and one of the main characters is a person who did commit terrorist acts in order to get independence back for her people, and they have to deal with that. I don't know, are you know enough Deep Space Nine off the top of your head to know that?
No. I know very little about Deep Space Nine. I watched TNG, but that was about as far as I went.
Yeah, so I never watched Deep Space Nine. Like as a kid, it was syndicated, but like Deep Space Nine does not syndicate well, because it's very, for the most part, it's very like there's a whole plot. It's not like TNG or Voyager, where it's like each episode can stand alone quite well. Like when they syndicated it, I was like, this is boring. Their ship doesn't even go anywhere. Like, I don't get this. But I watched it, in my 20s, and there are episodes that deal specifically with how to teach religion respectfully in school, if at all, along with science lessons. like the whole plot from start to finish, like first episode to last episode, has to do with like the captain of this spaceship dealing with the fact that the people on this place think he is a god. Like they think he is their chosen one. Because certain aliens have had a relationship with him. And so it's all about, you know, the one species colonized this other species planet. It was very violent. And, but now this planet has won their independence back, and Starfleet is sort of there, almost like a little UN. It's a trading post. Like it's an important outpost for commerce, but it's also, it's a very important strategic point in the galaxy, and they have to, keeping the peace between everyone is very difficult, and dealing with a lot of issues having to do with, colonization and, the war to get it back, and dealing with war crimes, a number of episodes dealing with war crimes, and like, it's, and I just couldn't believe, like, oh, this was made in, like, the late 80s? Wow. Like, I guess we've just been dealing with these issues forever, because it reminded me a lot of very relevant present-day events.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually the case, but it does feel like a lot of this stuff is coming to it's coming up to really heavily conflict situations. But maybe it's just because of my perspective. Maybe it's because I'm in the time that it's happening, and it just.
I think we get that feeling a lot, and then we don't remember when it doesn't actually blow up, right? Yeah. But that's not to say there aren't peaks and valleys where the chances of things really escalating are high, and that this is probably one of those points. I mean, this is probably a significantly more likely right now to have a real problem compared to a year ago or 5 years ago, right. It just, and you can never know for sure, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
I was just talking
the people who are in charge.
I went to a pretty small outdoor wedding last night, and I ended up talking about, like, I distinctly remember a point, and I think I was in high school, which feels embarrassing because I feel like I should have realized this sooner, but I distinctly remember a point in high school where I suddenly realized that, like, history is still a thing that is happening. Like, you would get maps, and you would get old maps, and you would learn about, like, this country existed now, and this country did that, and there was just, like, this moment that all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, like,
right.
This is still happening right now. Like, the things that are happening right now are the same types of things that were happening 10 years ago. It's not like countries used to change borders and now we're all settled down. Like, no, that's not
right.
At any time we could have some sort of historical shift that, puts a new chapter in a textbook. And that was like it was a big moment for me.
There are adults who don't understand that. So there's even like, I think it was in the 90s, like Margaret Thatcher and the neoliberal conservative type movement. They were really pushing the idea that this was the end of history. Like, this is where everything stops. This is how it's always going to be now. Completely missing the boat, of course, because the world is constantly in flux. But
that's really interesting. So they were just like, yeah, whatever middle school Dell thought, that's peak humanity there.
We have officially reached the peak of the mountain, and that is all.
God, that just seems so ridiculously, like, naive and egotistical at the same time.
Oh yeah, it was. I think it was almost entirely ego driven. Like, it's that Ronald Reagan idea of, that he made America perfect. Like, America is perfect when he's the president.
Well, we're going to touch on that later in my topic, actually.
Okay.
Everything is Ronald Reagan's fault. Just so everybody knows. It's a firm stance I have. Everything is Ronald Reagan's fault.
I already agree with you.
It's incredible the number of things you're like, God, this is so fucked up. Why do we do? And it's Ronald Reagan. Okay.
It's Ronald Reagan. Okay. So I guess before we move on to your stuff, the last thing I wanted to touch on was kind of just the China and Uyghur situation. We talked about it a few episodes ago, and we were, I think, pretty fairly on the side of calling it a genocide and condemning China, the state, for humanitarian crimes against the Uyghur people. But I think what we might not have missed is the reasoning that a lot of the Western states seem to be on board with calling it a genocide, and what's going on in the media that it seems to be focusing on it at this current time. And I mean, I maybe wouldn't necessarily say it's a genocide now, but it's certainly a crimes against, like, it's human rights are being violated pretty dramatically. And I think that that's indisputable. I don't think that there's anybody who can really say that there aren't violations going on there, and or crimes even. The reason that it becomes questionable is because a lot of the media, like, sources are actually, they all trace back to this one dude who's like a really hardcore Christian theocrat.
Yeah, I've read that a little bit.
So it's really weird. It really brings up the question of whether or not we can, how much of the information we're getting is accurate, and how much of it is like, where's the framing is more than anything. Like, I'm not worried. I don't want to give the state of China a free pass, right?
Yeah.
like I want to be very careful not to say that they're not doing anything wrong. Right. Which I've heard people say, like, and I'm pretty firmly against the idea that they're not doing anything wrong. But I do worry that when the Canadian Conservative Party is on board with calling it a genocide, when they refuse to call the way that we've actually literally tried to murder the Indigenous peoples of Canada a genocide.
Right.
Like, it seems like their motivation is, there's something to their motivation there that maybe I don't have the full story. So I really am concerned about where that's going.
Right. What are they using it for when they're suddenly on board with condemning it in the strongest terms, but not
right.
Not plenty of other things. Yeah, well, I think there's quite strong evidence for the whole re-education camps part of it. As far as like mass murder, I don't know that we have, and maybe we wouldn't ever have a lot of evidence for that. But I mean, I think the re-education camps, I've also seen some data from a company out of Australia of satellite footage. Yep. Of the compounds where they're keeping.
And that certainly doesn't seem good. Like, that's not good.
And that's certainly a form of cultural genocide. That sort of and a violation of human rights for sure. But yeah, maybe not actually to the level of what we did to Native Americans, or
right,
more on the level of what we did to the Japanese, perhaps, in World War II.
Yeah, where it became like, okay, now you're in prison. You're just in prison because we don't trust you because we're racists or whatever, right?
Yeah, although I don't, and I don't recall there being that much of the Japanese internment camps, I don't recall there being that much of an element of like forcing them. It's almost more like the Native American re-education centers, where they were like, you must speak English and you have to cut your hair and you can't, like really stressing this conformity to quote unquote,
right.
Western ideals. Yeah. So it seems like kind of that kind of situation where it's like, you're not allowed to be Muslim and you have to, say our Pledge of Allegiance a million times and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. It's very much residential school, Canadian residential school type stuff.
Yeah, but with more barbed wire.
Right. Yeah.
And plenty of adults. Mostly adults.
Yeah, it's not all just children.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mess is what it really is. And even from a layperson's perspective, it's really, really hard to get a handle on all of the things that, governments do, because the American government has an agenda. The Canadian government has an agenda. The Chinese government has an agenda, and everybody's trying to obfuscate and cover up what they're doing. And the media is all complicit in like reporting what they hear from their CIA guy and also reporting what they hear from this contact they have in China and stuff like that.
Well, it's amazing the way, narratives get pushed and take root and how little it may or may not have basis in reality, even when people are meaning well and like reporting the facts, right? And I think you can see that even in the story that I'm going to talk about. You can see how like a narrative develops that can strongly influence people's behavior, the behavior of millions and millions of people and the spending of hundreds of millions of dollars and, really life-altering stuff just because of a couple things, a couple trigger points, and then this narrative builds up and off you go.
It's amazing what, like the power that media has, even though they're just people doing a thing, doing a job and reporting on things that they're told to report on or that they choose to report on, but are given approval for.
Right. And
because that's all owned too by people who have moneyed interests in one thing or another thing. Like Rupert Murdoch isn't like a good guy.
God, no.
So, or what's the other guy? Blackwell or something.
I'm not sure.
Well, I think he owns a bunch of Canadian stuff. So
okay, yeah, it doesn't sound familiar to me.
Yeah, it makes it hard to trust a lot of like what would be considered mainstream sources because they may or may not cover things in a certain way. Not because of some conspiracy, but just literally because their boss is like, actually, maybe we should take this angle on it, Yeah.
I think it's a really important or interesting skill to develop, and it kind of takes a lot of effort, and you have to hold a lot of things in your mind at once, and the casual news consumer is probably never going to do this, but like I don't think that most mainstream reputable outlets are going to be lying.
Right.
So how do you read between the lines of what no one is saying? Right? So like they're not lying and they told you X, Y, and Z. Or, but nobody even mentioned A, B, and C. And they didn't say A, B, and C weren't happening. So how can you read about something happening and hold it in your head that X, Y, and Z happened, but also understand that X, Y, and Z may not be the only things that happened.
Right. Or that their X, Y, and Z may have an impact that you're not being told about, that isn't being covered, right? Or that a cause that might not be covered,
Yeah.
So I don't like it.
But I think it's also important to recognize a little bit of what we were saying before. That has been happening for probably as long as humans have existed.
Yeah.
Certain stories, certainly if you ever read historical records of papers like 100 years ago, it was the same way. And I'm sure even when it was word of mouth, even think about stories about ancient Greece, like propaganda existed and people spread, whenever somebody's trying to figure out what actually happened in history, they have to take into account like who wrote this down and what was their agenda and what was the cultural milieu of the time. Because people have always been like this, and any individual person has never been able to have perfect knowledge of everything that's happening.
Yeah.
And, objectivity is not
that's
possible.
The part I don't like.
So the only answer, or at least my tactic on it, is just to find out as much information as possible. So you can just fill in as many dots as possible, and then hopefully, you'll get closer to the real picture.
That's hopefully, yeah. Yeah, I don't like it. Not one bit.
Yeah, and you can see like how much energy it takes to like be well informed. It's not a surprise at all, especially the way our current society's grind goes, that most people don't have the energy or the time to deal with it at all. Yeah,
like I remember back like when news channels became a thing, And suddenly everybody was talking about the 24-hour news cycle, And now it's just the accepted norm that news is always happening at all times. And we're all being fed like this constant stream of information. And some of it gets through and some of it we can analyze and some of it just bounces off, like, because we can't actually look at it.
Well, and at this point, how much of it is handled by algorithms, of what gets shown to you. It's not even about the people that you're choosing to listen to. Someone else is choosing for you who you're going to listen to, which is certainly a new evolution to the problem that probably magnifies it, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, TikTok is particularly interesting with the algorithms. It's really interesting how fast and adaptive their algorithm is. It's a little terrifying.
Yeah.
How quickly and extremely it silos people,
Right. Like, when I first got onto TikTok, I was getting a lot of cosplay stuff. Like somehow I liked a video with somebody with a skull painted mask. And so I was getting all this other stuff, all this cosplay stuff. And then somewhere along the line, I liked a social justice post. And now like 90% of my TikTok feed is feminism or anti-racism, which is okay. I'm okay with that. Like, that's good. But
I'm on bisexual ADHD Twitter or TikTok. So that's the silo I've been.
Yeah, I probably won't ever see that one.
Yeah, and my roommate Gwen spent a lot of time looking at and liking farm videos, and so there's a lot of farm stuff and a number of right-wing things getting thrown in there. So.
Oh, geez, is that right?
Which is funny because she's like the most leftist you'll ever meet.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense because, especially in America, like farming is considered like a conservative thing, right?
Yeah, and it's not, and it didn't used to be.
No,
that's kind of
always,
a Reagan thing too, to be honest. Certainly during like the FDR New Deal era, that farmers were a big labor force. They were, the New Deal was huge for them. Big Democratic bloc there.
Yeah.
And there's probably a pretty significant split between Southern farmers and Northern farmers that I would imagine you would find as well.
Yeah, we had in Saskatchewan actually we had quite a similar thing where like for a long time even our farthest left party was voted for by the majority of farmers and rural people, and then it evolved. Actually, for us, it wasn't necessarily right around Reagan, but mostly closer to, what was it, like the Bush, the one Bush where he went into Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the trend accelerated a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. I'm sure it did. But even in I have a whole canned rant about the 2016 farmer numbers. There was only one study ever done. It almost only selected rich white guy farmers and not most farmers at all. You needed like 300, I don't remember the details. You needed like 300 acres to be considered a farmer, which would make like the vast majority of dairy farmers not farmers according to them, which is ridiculous. And anybody that wasn't a crop farmer, like a mainly crop farmer, would be out immediately, like any other kind of farming. It would have eliminated anyone in a more expensive state, like a coastal state or anything like that, probably, a lot of them. And they still only had like I think it was 56% of farmers voting for Trump. And I looked it up. A poll taken the same week showed white men in general, 56% voting for Trump. Because this was pre-election. It was like October before the election. So, surprise, a demographic where you polled 80% white guys was exactly just like a typical white guy. So, and that is the poll that everybody used to write their articles saying farmers were obsessed with Trump.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
So that is the only source on farmers and Trump. Well, okay, there was like one that was like some magazine that had people click a thing online, but it was not like a poll. This one was like a literal poll. It was a terrible poll. It was set up to skew things. Basically, it was set up in a way that you would expect it to skew way further right than farmers actually skew. And all they found was that farmers support him at the same rate as white men support him. So I was like, how? And it got reported, it was original reporting by like Mother Jones, and then it got reported out by 1 million people that way, just linking back to Mother Jones. And it was just so frustrating for me because it felt like you get that narrative started and suddenly farmers that aren't Trump supporters get afraid to speak up about not being Trump supporters because they suddenly think all their friends must be Trump supporters, even when they're not. So that's how these things build up. You get 55% of something and the media reports it as vast majority, overwhelming amount. And suddenly everybody thinks that they're in a minority when they're actually just barely in the minority. And if everybody wasn't afraid of being a minority in that situation, you probably, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yep. But yeah, and so it's, it makes me nervous. The rural-urban divide is heavily skewed along lines of opportunity. Like and I'm sure, Cory, you experienced some of this, and you're probably more familiar with this than the average, like, U.S. citizen is, but like, I can't get an Uber. I can't get an Instacart. Yeah. And I don't actually live in a very rural area. Like, my aunt and uncle live in a rural area. They have to drive 45 minutes to get groceries. Their school graduates like 12 kids a year. That's a rural area. Yeah. I live in an area, I'm 15 minutes away from a town of 20,000 people. This is not rural. I'm a couple minutes from a major highway. I'm an hour from a major airport. My husband and I both have jobs based in Minneapolis. Like, we are not rural. But like, I can't get an Instacart. I can't get an Uber. I cannot get anything delivered except for pizza. And people will be like, oh gosh, you must be like so stuck up that you like don't eat Thai food. And I'm like, where the hell would I get Thai food? I mean, Thai food is delicious, but like, I don't know when I would have the opportunity to ever eat it. Sounds great. Would love it. So like, there's just like such a cultural divide, and like internet access is huge. Like in my company, because we're an agricultural company, like we have people who can barely work online. Like they can't do video meetings. And like it fosters this culture of just like, it just creates this like simmering jealousy. And it's really, really difficult for people to feel like it's almost like these people have so many opportunities that it's like they're speaking a different language, and you just feel like you have nothing in common with them. And like, how are you expected to get along with these people? And and then you have the Republicans who are purposely driving these cultural wedges, like this frickin' hamburger stuff, right? Legitimately, if you talk to a lot of rural people, they will tell you that most city people are vegans.
I guarantee you they are not.
Right. And like, is veganism growing? Yes. It's still like 3% of the US population. Yeah. But because that's what they hear about, and we have this automatic, like the human brain purposely does threat magnification, right? So my mother was in PR for the dairy industry, which involved, they spent a lot of time at a certain point training farmers on how to talk to regular people confidently and encourage them to do it, and encourage them to say, like, we have polls showing that people trust farmers if farmers talk to them, right? So just like chat with people instead of just being like worried to say it, because the number of times they had to tell people over and over again, like, you think that the vast majority of people at the grocery store hate you. They don't. 95% of people at the grocery store are just there to get the cheapest food and leave.
Yeah.
And, or maybe they have some thoughts or concerns or questions that they don't really feel like they have a strong opinion about. And if you chatted with them, they would come out with an opinion that you're a generally good person who's generally doing their best and not trying to poison them. But legitimately, farmers feel like all city people think that we are evil people poisoning them and the land. Like, that is what farmers think other people think about them. Because we have this intense threat magnification, and that is what Republicans in particular are using to activate their base. Yeah. And the sad part is the answer to that is doing things like spending a shit ton of money to make sure rural people actually have the same access to all the shit, you know, to make sure they have good roads and not like public transportation everywhere, but, you know, maybe that light rail does go all the way from Minneapolis to St. Cloud. The Republicans purposely stopped it halfway in between so that no one would use it. Like, they purposely stopped the light rail in the middle of nowhere so that no one would use it instead of taking it from major city to major city. Right. So that they can now say nobody's using it, and that's why we should spend no money on it. It's just, and so
it's such an underhanded tactic that,
it's so evil, isn't it? Yeah. And it just upsets me because now Trump in particular brought on this thing where it's like, guess what, city people, all farmers hate you. And so now rural people are like, city people don't even want to help us. You know what I mean? Which is obviously in a much smaller sense, kind of like what we started out talking about. You know how you radicalize people? You separate them and then put them in dire straits. You know how you de-radicalize people? You give them everything you have. And Trump did a damn good job making sure that not just rural people hate city people, but now I think he really got city people to hate rural people. And it was not that reciprocated before Trump.
Right. It's funny because it is part of like just general culture too, like the urban rural divide, where like even in movies, there's that trope that's been going back decades.
Have you ever seen a movie in which a farmer has a normal truck?
No. They always have the old beat up truck.
Like a truck from like 1957. Not even like a beat up 80s truck. Like, have you ever just seen an
now
F-150?
It might be closer to 80s, but
have you ever seen an F-150 in a movie? No.
No, if they drive an F-150, it's because they are a business owner who drives a truck, not a farmer. Yeah, like
or a tractor with a cab. Have you ever seen a tractor with a cab? No. We never have a tractor with a cab in a movie. We invented cabs in like 1960, but.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Most farmers don't farm without air conditioning.
Skin cancer for everyone. So anyway, back to shitting on Ronald Reagan, perhaps?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So it recently came to my attention that apparently in the UK and Canada, and probably some other places, you don't have to pee in a cup for virtually every job like you do in America. So the only jobs where I haven't had to take a drug test, and I have 2 4-year degrees, and many of my jobs have been like cubicle office jobs in agriculture, but cubicle office jobs still have to take a drug test. Because it'll just be like the company's blanket policy. Right. I did get one job to hire me slightly before the drug test, because if I started, the health insurance kicked in on the 1st of the month after you started. And so my boss insisted that I start on like March 31st so that I would have health insurance right away, rather than have me start on like April 2nd and have to go 4 weeks without any health insurance. So he let me start before my results were back in from my drug test, as long as I promised him that I wasn't on cocaine or anything. That was his exact words. And I was like, nope, not on any cocaine. We're good.
The funny thing about cocaine is that it doesn't stay in your system very long. It's gone within like 8 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's there are statistics. It's going down. Like in the past, I think medical marijuana has probably pushed it down, and maybe some just like evidence-based, because surprise, there's not really evidence that it helps at all. No. But basically, in the very early, well, it started with Vietnam, actually. It started with Vietnam. And I think people are familiar with, so I'm not going to get into because I didn't touch on this in my research. The idea that a lot of soldiers came home from Vietnam with a drug problem. Whether it be marijuana or heroin or whatever. And so the military was like, oh shit. So the military started doing a lot of routine drug testing because of this drug problem they were having in Vietnam. And so that is where the companies that do drug testing suddenly got, contracts and lucrative. It kind of created the industry, right? And so by the early 80s, you had about 20% of companies. Now, it's not like 20% of people, but 20% of companies using some drug testing in some capacity.
Okay.
And then in 1981, I'm going to look up the name of this, there was an incident called the Nimitz incident. So it was a ship called the USS Nimitz. It was a twin-engine Navy plane crashed into the deck of the nuclear carrier, the USS Nimitz, okay? Which caused an onboard missile to detonate.
Okay.
It killed 14 crewmen, and on autopsy, they drug tested them, and 6 of those 14 people had used marijuana in the preceding 30 days.
Did the person who crashed the plane use marijuana?
No.
So then what difference?
There was no reason to think drugs had anything to do with it, although there was some speculation that the pilot of the plane may have had cold medicine which impaired him. But for some reason, this just panic. There was just this narrative when they found out that these 6 people had used marijuana, they tested positive for drugs, not have used marijuana at some point in the preceding 30 days. They just said 6 of them tested positive for drugs. Oh my God, crisis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then the military got hardcore about the drug testing, routine drug testing constantly. They even did things like they would routinely test people at autopsy, even if they didn't suspect drug use at all, just to see, what was happening, because they presumed that if you were in a fatal accident of some kind or were injured in some way, it's likely that drugs were to blame. Well, they found out that about 2% of them had used marijuana in the last 30 days. So they decided that confirmed their suspicions. I don't know why.
2% doesn't sound like confirmation.
So in the late 80s, Reagan created an executive order called the Drug-Free Federal Workplace. It was his concept. I think the name of the executive order was a little longer than that. But he claimed that federal employees who used illegal drugs were less productive, less reliable, prone to absenteeism, and a burden on their fellow employees, had lapses of judgment, were subject to blackmail, and a burden to the federal government and therefore all of the taxpayers. And he had literally nothing to back this up. At this point, I don't think there were any studies available on this at all.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
There ended up being some studies in the late 80s and early 90s, and for some reason they kept doing them on the Postal Service. There were some studies that showed 5% of employees would be fired after a year, but 10% of employees who tested positive for drugs would be fired within a year. And this was a blind study where they didn't tell the employer the result of the drug test, if that makes sense. So the drugs were not actually a factor. But they didn't really control for anything. The Postal Service may have been a particularly, it was only on the Postal Service. So it's only applicable so far. Right.
And is that the right way to compare those statistics?
Not really. In 1987, we had another accident that we got really paranoid about. So there was a train derailment between DC and Baltimore, and it killed 16 people. And the engineer admitted that him and his brakeman had been passing a joint back and forth when the accident had taken place.
So they were actually high at the time of the accident.
They were literally smoking a joint at the time, which is okay, at least if you had a panic after this, so there was also some like one of the guys was an alcoholic and he had been drinking really late the night before, so he might have already been impaired from that. There was apparently some narcotics involved later.
Okay.
There was a lot going on with these guys.
So naturally you have to control the average worker from smoking pot a week ago.
Yeah, so by 1990, you're up to 50% of the Fortune 1000, I guess. 50% of them are regularly drug testing at least some people. By 1988, the federal government required all government all government, so any company that does business with the U.S. government, which has a really big influence on the private sector, needed to drug test, right?
That's
and
brutal.
by 1991, they then required drug and alcohol testing of everyone that was a quote-unquote safety-sensitive employee, regardless of what was going on. So, like, anybody driving, anything. I think it was, like, I don't think it's just, like, anybody who, like, drives a skid loader at work. I think it's, like, specifically, like, do you drive a vehicle on the road?
Okay.
By 1996, you're looking at over 80% of employers doing drug testing.
Wow.
And one of the reasons for that is that at the same time, I don't know how unemployment or like workers' comp works in Canada, but in the US, workers' comp, meaning the insurance that pays for your medical bills, if you, I had a dog barking, you've got kids, it's fine. We're good. So workers' comp is the insurance. It's generally administered by the federal government or the state government. And sometimes it's private companies that administer it, but like very tightly regulated by the local, like the state or federal government. It's the insurance that pays your medical bills if you get hurt at work.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like we've got workers' comp, but yeah.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to pay medical bills. All it has to do is cover your wages because we have universal health care.
Right. So it's healthcare, and I guess it probably it must cover the wages too. I'm pretty sure it does both. It's the medical and the wages. And all that does is just create a big fight between insurance companies where nobody wants to pay your bill and then everybody has to sue each other about, did you really get hurt or whatever? But anyway, so the federal government, and now it's also written into a lot of state laws as well, that workers' comp will give you a significant discount if you are drug testing every employee you hire. Ah, okay. So there are some companies that probably have so like my husband's company is in financial services, tax accounting stuff. They probably have a super low workers' comp bill because like the chances, like I'm sure they have like some carpal tunnel claims or like somebody trips in the office or something, but like probably a really, really, really low workers' comp bill to begin with. Yeah. And then the discount that they would get on it maybe then is not worth it. And they feel like, why would we spend the money to drug test our employees? It doesn't make sense, right? But any company that has like a mix of employees of like office and field work or anything like that is probably getting a pretty big discount on their workers' comp bill just to drug test everybody. And that's right. The way that works is usually that you get drug tested when you get hired. Right. And then you only get drug tested annually in a specific, like if you're doing those safety sensitive public transportation jobs. So it's this weird thing where like, you know, because marijuana sticks around for 30 days, 6 weeks. I mean, I know there's tricks, you can work on it, whatever, but like to be safe. So like you only get drug tested the one time when you get hired. And then like you're in this awkward position if you like lose your job for some reason and you need to go back to work because you're probably going to get drug tested when you need to get a new job, but not in between. So you go 10 years without getting drug tested, right? And like, I don't know how it is for you guys, but generally speaking, like when you get drug tested, like somebody has to be in the room with you while you're peeing and stuff. So like, it's not like, it's not like a fun experience. And like for people with like dealing with anxiety issues or stuff like that, it's like pretty awful, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, so basically the US government got super excited about it via the military and then Ronald Reagan. And then they basically wrote it into the workers' comp laws and made it this financial thing. Of course. So people have this financial incentive to to drug test people all the time. And I think I read it was like, there's like 100 million drug tests done in the US every year. And we only have a population of like 300 some million. So you can imagine what percent of the working populations are getting these drug tests all the time. So we're obsessed with drug tests, and it's kind of silly. And there's basically no evidence whatsoever that it does anything. And here's the really evil part. A lot of times, they will, if you make a workers' comp claim, the first thing they do is give you a drug test.
Yeah.
And if you test positive, then they will deny your workers' comp claim.
Of course.
Even if it's you may have used marijuana 30 days ago and it may have been legal in your state and had nothing to do with the fact that you tripped in the hallway.
Or you smoked after your accident or whatever. Like, that's the... We have...
So, yeah, a lot of people know I can't claim this injury and I can't get this treatment for this injury because I would get fired. Because I would get a drug test if I claimed this injury. Which is just evil.
Yeah, no, that's...
So then you go without healthcare at all.
Yeah, that's great.
Which is definitely great for company productivity, right?
I had to get drug tested when I started my job 8 years ago. Almost 9 years ago. When I worked for a company that, big surprise, the headquarters was in Texas. So they just applied the same rule to everybody across the board at hiring. And then but nobody was in the room, right? I could actually have had a bag of urine that was clean if I wanted to. So I could have used one of the tricks that people use when they have the opportunity, but I didn't need to because I wasn't smoking at the time. But
right. Yeah, no, I was kind of like, I did not know that going into the workforce. Like, I honestly didn't really know, especially for an office job. And I was like smoking occasionally. So like when it came up, I was like, oh, well, good thing I haven't had the opportunity to smoke recently. I guess I'll be all right. But like, yeah, I legit didn't know that was a thing. Like, why would people do that? It's not like a thing they tell you in college. You know, so I definitely, it caught me by surprise, but I was luckily fine. But yeah, I could have been in trouble without even realizing, you know?
Yeah.
And here is one really, really depressing fact. One of the only studies they have done about the effectiveness of drug tests is that they are extremely effective for one thing: increasing the number of black men who get hired.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if a company drug tests, they are significantly less biased against black men.
Okay.
If they don't drug test, they do a really shitty job hiring black men. And the idea... It must be that people who do the hiring, for some reason, like even knowing what we know about bias, it just sounds ridiculous to say that they just like think black guys are doing drugs and then like the clean drug test is like, oh, he's one of the good ones. But just like the amount of positive effort you have to put into just assuming someone uses drugs is just bizarre to me. But like assuming and caring, you know what I mean?
Right,
and so apparently... The one good thing about drug tests, the only thing it's shown to be effective at, is reducing a specific type of bias in hiring, which is...
that's really interesting.
Giving hiring managers the confidence that black men are not on drugs, which is crazy that we need an invasive test like that to think that.
Of course, yeah. That's an odd side effect of that. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, it's super weird, isn't it?
I guess... Maybe it is the case that fewer black men do drugs than white men, and therefore they would drug test negative more often.
I think the statistics generally show, and I didn't read the details of that particular study, and maybe they covered that like within that study. But generally speaking, I think the statistics show that black folks and white folks use marijuana at almost identical rates, which
I thought that was the case.
Been cited as a reason that the crime statistics are such bullshit.
Right.
But I don't know how far that breaks down as to like, you know, ages. Is it the same for eight? You know, I don't know the details of that exactly, but I think baseline, it's pretty safe to assume the rates of drug use are probably pretty comparable. Especially because everybody going in probably knows they're going to get drug tested. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a point at which you know you're going to get drug tested, you know? So
yeah, like especially like you say, like if every employer is doing it.
Yeah, it's and especially lower wage jobs are the more common ones to draw. You know, financial services is, but like I said, even jobs that you just never know, because even jobs that have a 4-year degree, if their company has any crossover into a non-office type of job, they probably are doing the drug testing.
Okay.
It's because it's like a company-wide policy. But nobody's driving any vehicles for my husband's company, you know?
Just to get to and from work.
Right. Yeah, so that's the history of drug testing. That's
interesting.
Ronald Reagan's fault.
Of course it is. Lots of things are Ronald Reagan's fault. Yeah, it seems bizarre. Like, I guess much of the American system seems really bizarre to me, right? Because we have universal health care here. And if you have that, you automatically take a lot of the risk off of the table for employers, employees, and just people in general. Like, everybody's a little bit better off when you have universal health care.
Yeah, it's
funny how it
would be huge for small businesses. You know, it would be just huge for small businesses to have universal health care, like the burden it would eliminate for people. Yeah, I don't know. You know, I'd be really interested to know how, I don't know even know how you would compare this, but it sure seems to me like America is particularly susceptible to the viral mania scare, right? Like the, yes. Oh my God, marijuana, even though that wasn't even the story, right? Like, and then suddenly our whole culture shifts to accommodate this single incident, you know?
There's a really good podcast, American Hysteria, where she goes into like various subjects that the U.S., like America is particularly adept at picking up on and panicking about things.
Yeah. Like, why?
Losing their shit. I don't know.
Like, why are we you know, like, I'm sure there's examples from other countries.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. But it just seems like America's
I feel like
really
Canada's
good at
pretty
it.
chill, though. Like, I feel like Canada would be on the less susceptible end, I think, for the most part.
I don't want to give us too much credit. a little bit more chill than the U.S. is not that chill.
A little bit more level-headed.
I think, like we didn't leave, like we didn't revolt against the Queen. We kind of just hung out and waited until she was like, yeah, you can be your own country now. Stuff like that. Yeah. But we do. And I said this on a podcast I was on this morning, actually. We get so much of our culture from the United States that.
But like filtered down with less hysteria, maybe.
A little bit less. Like back in the 80s, there was a lot of panic about Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Oh, Jesus.
Because it was satanic and there was some kid went missing.
I'm too young
or whatever.
for the satanic panic, and it just sounds so wildly implausible and ridiculous. I just can't believe anybody even thought that without bursting into laughter.
I know. Yeah. No, that's a fair reaction, because listening back to stuff on it now, I'm like, how did anybody take this seriously? But also we have QAnon now. So, so who knows? In 20 years, we'll go, oh, how did anybody buy into that? I
mean, I cannot read a QAnon thing without laughing. So, but I feel like QAnon theories aren't being like promoted as possible on the mainstream news. Like, on Fox a little bit maybe, but I feel like the satanic panic stuff was like pretty mainstream.
Yeah, it was certainly like entertained by like daytime talk radio or talk shows and all that stuff that your average person could see regularly.
You know, the other person, it's all Reagan's fault and Oprah. Reagan and Oprah together.
Yep. Yeah. Oprah has done a lot of harm to society, all in order to, make herself successful.
That's just how That's my take. Reagan and Oprah. Any problem of the modern day can take it back to one of those two.
I think that's pretty close. Like that's a pretty universal theory, I think. But
right.
I suppose it's time to go.
Yeah, with that extremely profound realization, let's wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah, you can find us at skeptarchy.com. Our Twitter is at skeptarchypod. Facebook.com/skeptarchy is our Facebook page. And you can email us at skeptarchy@gmail.com.
I'm on Twitter at more cowbell, spelled funny. Look it up. I'm on Facebook as Dell on Earth.
And I am on Facebook at facebook.com/CJBrainstorm. And that's not it, right? This is the one. At Skeptical Lefty. That's my Twitter. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Definitely.
It was a good chat, even though it was just the two of us.
For sure. All right. Have a good night.
You too. Yeah, no, it's only certain industries that require it or even add it to your contract. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
You get contracts. It's quite a concept.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I have one beer left.
Do the liquor stores, do they have liquor stores open on Sundays in your neck of the woods? You say that like it's obvious. We just got liquor stores on Sundays like 3 years ago, and the hours are still like super limited. So
yeah, there was a big fight about opening stores and liquor stores on Sundays back when I was like a teenager. But for most of my life, I've been able to buy whatever I need on Sundays.
See, I was kind of like didn't want it to happen. Like, I'm kind of like, does everybody need to work 24/7, 7 days a week and have everything available to us? Like, I understand if you're talking about groceries, there's like accessibility issues for people working different shifts, but like, you know, like we don't really need to have everything at our fingertips 24/7 all the time because people have to work to make that happen. And that's kind of annoying. And like, I'm kind of a fan of like different days of the week having different concepts to them. Like,
yeah,
you know,
the weekend is supposed to have some significance, right?
Yeah, like I like the idea that like, you know, days of the week are different-ish. Like, I just feel like there's this like push that everything should be open all the time and everything should be exactly the same all the time. And I find that really lame, to be honest. So, and I've certainly been annoyed by the lack of alcohol on Sundays a million times, but I'd kind of rather have that than, you know, I mean, you still have to plan. It's like 11 to 2. Our local liquor store is open. So
okay,
it's not a lot on Sundays.
Yeah, no kidding. No, as far as I know, it's open from like probably 11 till 7 or something. If you go in the afternoon, you're good.
Yeah.
So, but yes, this is my last beer because I'm too lazy to go.
It's a lot of work, to be honest.
I have not left the house today, and I liked it. I like to have the occasional day like that.
I went to a wedding last night.
Oh, fun.
Outdoor wedding. So yeah, I have 6 weddings this summer. It's going to be a busy one. Yeah, I was out of steam by like 9 p.m. and we went home.
Oh, wow.
It's like I've been here since 3:30 and it's 9 p.m. I don't know how any
6 hours.
It's a lot. But
a lot.
But I remember going to weddings and partying well into the night.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to that person, but they're not around anymore. So
I know what happened to that person for me is I got old.
I'm not as old as you just yet. So.
I hit 35 and suddenly I started going out less and being able to do less. And that's a long time ago already now. 35 is like 9 years ago. So.
I'm only 31 and I'm really feeling a bit old and I'm kind of in denial about it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, at 31, you can still feel like you're in denial a bit about it. That's not that bad. When I turned 40, my kids just decided that they would just start saying that I was old now.
How kind of them.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? Yeah. And my son is graduating high school this year, so.
Wow. Yeah, my parents didn't have me till they were 33, so.
Oh, wow.
They were old my whole life. I mean, not that old. There were people whose parents were older, but.
Well, when I think about like our 2-year-old, I mean, when she graduates, I'm going to be 60 years old.
Right. Yeah.
So that's fun.
Are you looking forward to just looking your own mortality in the face now?
Yeah, that's right. It's a good thing she's so damn cute.
Okay, well,
yeah, I guess if you're recording, then I will start my Audacity. I started the StreamYard already.
Yes, I see that. I can start Audacity. Okay.
All right, and there we go.
Oh, knocking things. I really need to get a new set of headphones. This one is now held together with tape in multiple places.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Time to buy some new ones in.
It's on order from Amazon.
All right, you want to do the intro this time?
Sure. What do I say?
Hi, and welcome to Skeptarchy.
Okay, I can do that. Do you want to do anything to sync this, or like are you probably just going to use the StreamYard anyway?
When it's just two of us, the sync up is really easy, so.
Oh, okay. Cool. So should I just start?
Sure. Whenever you're ready.
Wait, what do I say? I don't know why I'm so nervous about this. I say, welcome to Skeptarchy. This is Dell. Okay. All right. Okay. It's just welcome to Skeptarchy. That's the whole, okay.
Whatever. You can add something if you want.
No, that's too much pressure. Okay.
Come here. Okay, go upstairs.
No.
Go.
Not going.
I'm not going. Okay. Yeah. No, I had to get. Shh.